Oh boy.
Randall, where did the list of guides go that had all the summaries and executive summary things in it that we were supposed to review and like summarize?
If I had a guess, it would be in the drive
Okay.
because I don't think that we ever really expanded on that.
I
I
mean,
did read the P-Cert this morning, and I kind of been reading it in parts, but I read it like I sat down and read it this morning and was explaining some of it to Anthony. And I actually think that that's pretty much it. Now, I've had an array in trying to document the problem space. I've had an array of conversations with people. Let me share my screen. Um, in terms of like, here, let me do this, but let me not create an infinity mirror. Um, I've been trying to like talk to people about it, like a lot of like distro people, people through homebrew, which is not necessarily distro people, but like upstream projects, gnome, kind of getting a lot of different opinions, and they pretty much all range on like most of what people envision us being is more communicative and collaborative. So in other words, like in coordinating vulnerabilities um between organizations, because apparently that's a very large friction point for a lot of people.
what?
Yeah, I know.
I'm sorry, what's friction? I was sending an email.
um the communities communicating with each other, like Gnome and Wayland and all these people. I'm very involved in like Linux community, so obviously I'm talking about very Linuxy projects. But yeah, and Homebrew's even gone as far as saying that they've actually backed down from reporting things in the past just to not like in fear of starting something. So they've just like silently like fixed it, and they're not supposed to do that. It like goes against the homebrew ideology, but they've done it just because there are certain projects that are known for being like extra hostile.
Okay, so I want to kind of like double check that I understood this. There are two problems. There are open source projects that are important to consumption by adopters whose either community or maintainers are openly hostile towards change. That's one. And then the other one is the project, inter foundation, inter ecosystem communication paths don't really exist. So within one community of individuals, there is a clear explanation of like, in clear level of understanding when an incident comes up, here's how we share that information out. You're already part of the community, you get the benefit of all those existing comms channel. What doesn't exist is that inner community comms channel, like an interstate system.
Well, that and also like I feel, and this is something that's come up in Gnome, but it's come up in several communities, which is that like just because we don't have the resources to handle something doesn't mean we don't care. And I think that's the other thing where, like, on the flip side of the maintainers, I think that that's where a lot of people don't understand that there's a difference in not having resources and not caring. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of people get like political about that, like, oh, you guys, like, for example, let's pick on Astro for a second, just real quick. Like Fred told me, like, you're the only guy that knows security out of everybody, so if you start implementing things that we don't understand, it's going to be an issue. So like you have to like figure it out, like how we're going to document things.
So
And
that
he even went as far as saying, and this is my problem, Randall, with your security, that nobody else in the JavaScript ecosystem is implementing like the security you're talking about. So we have no reference to like actually even like say this is the right thing to do. So he was almost going as far as saying like security is not a priority. Like, I know that's not what he was trying to say, but it almost came off that way. And like I get it.
okay. So effectively, security practitioners, when they go and help projects, are becoming single points of failure because there is no like knowledge.
Correct.
That makes that makes a lot of sense when you think about it. And this goes back to the education problem and like, what does that pipeline of education look like? I've always said that that's a generational problem, that it's like climate change. We
And let
should
me
have
give
really
you, and to give you some background on Fred, he was one of the leaders in the polymer team. And now he's the leader, the founder of Astro.
okay.
So we're talking big boy. We're not talking like, oh, this is some random guy that like just so happened to build something. Like, yeah.
Okay. I want to make sure I'm writing this down, because like these are thematic elements that
If you like, I can go as far as reading his message to you.
I'm good. I believe you.
We commentate. We're all gossip queens, the little team that I have going on. We have nothing better to do but
Okay.
provide commentary. Color commentary, I might add.
All right. Did you all happen to listen to the latest episode of the Open Source Security Podcast?
I did not.
Yeah.
And they talked about Python tar files, and there were a few episodes before that, but this has been coming up as a theme from Josh and Kurt. They've been talking about the concept of, well, such and such should know better. So as a developer, when you're making a design decision or you're making a decision to not build in a security feature, there's often an assumption, well, my users should know better. They should know the right way of doing things. And the premise of the discussion on the latest episode was that we should have known, like, that's an okay excuse many years ago when we didn't have all of these problems, and we haven't advanced as far as we have, and we don't have as much of the security feature sets commoditized across different technology stacks. But in today's day and age, that's not how software engineering and software development actually works. It's nobody reads the docs, people just do, they just ship it. So the idea of such and such should know better is no longer a valid reason for not implementing security features, which is an interesting counterpoint to the fact that security is a single point of failure for a lot of these projects because there is no like knowledge.
Right.
So like for us doing the SIRT documents and trying to tie in our solutions for how we're going to address this against each of these individual problems, I don't think that we'll be able to decouple those, and that'll probably be a huge push for the CERTs group to do a lot of education, outreach, and awareness, and do this like communications channel networking between communities and foundations, and like basically we're a giant phone book for open source is effectively what I'm hearing you say, Randall, based off of the research that you've done.
And to be honest with you right now, not to be like that about it, but because I travel through so many different communities, I feel like that's kind of what I do. So I feel like maybe there should be more people, because I bring a lot of problems to the attention of people that don't know that. Like, for example, Gnome and Gentoo have a very storied relationship of who pointing the finger, because they love pointing this finger game about whose fault is it. And then you get to this point where it's like, well, maybe, you know what? Gnome gives out too many error messages. And that's not really like a problem. But you see my point that like I do see the friction point between communities. And sometimes there are things that you like some of the error messages that Gentoo will claim are just BS and should be completely ignored, and Gentoo should be, or Gnome should be quiet about. They're kind of scary sometimes. Like, we lost your session for your security agent. Like, like can't find it on the dbus, so that doesn't exist. You know, like, so it's stuff like that you kind of be like, but this is a legitimate problem, right? And they're like, well, go tell Gnome. And then Gnome tells you, well, you should tell Gentoo. And then it's like, I know, but I just came from there. And then where do you go? You know, because it could be a valid security issue. And then of course you find some issue from like 10 years ago that's still open that nobody just touched. And then that caused the whole thing. But that's a separate discussion.
I'm making notes in the doc because I want to make sure that we capture this.
And not every there's a lot of things, and I feel like the SIRT can maybe provide some help. I think is the bottom line in misunderstandings in because there's also the question of whose responsibility is it. And I mean that from a security perspective, because you can't rely that the user is going to have something set up, which is always a discussion in GNOME, for example, that, oh, well, most Linux computers have a firewall, but that's not always true.
Then those expectations should be documented so that downstream consumers can understand what the expectations of upstream are. This is how we've produced this software.
Right.
I think that's a good call out though, because that goes back to the my adopters should know better comment is we make a lot of assumptions, but yet we don't document them, or when we do, nobody's reading it.
And then you have the middle point where upstream projects have a strong dislike or distaste in their mouth for Debian that will go out and just enforce things on people because they think that that's the way they should be enforced.
Yeah.
Well, and when you look at commercial distributions, those are focused at a particular demographic and they must have tighter controls. It's not necessarily what the upstream or even all users want. But I think that the commercial distros have a very good perspective around, hey, these are reasonable expected security controls. Maybe people should do things this way. So maybe even that is something we could do, is to help share some of that messaging. This is what a reasonable business user comes to expect around this software.
Yeah. I think we have a general good understanding of that. It's just, how do we convert that problem space, that undocumented or uncommunicated assumptions or unreceived?
Another quick question, Krob, because this has come up and I actually have a issue that I can refer you guys to. Let me open up my homebrew Slack. So we've had this huge discussion around adding pick flags to PhotoBuff, and it's turned into this discussion of, well, at what, or actually you guys can see my screen. What am I talking about? I'll try to be fancy. Like, where did Zoom go? And but yeah, so because this goes back to that compiler flag document we have, because you see, I think that some of this stuff, okay, so first of all, there isn't such a thing as performance penalty of activating too many flags, but the performance penalty on some of this stuff is so minimal, where on modern processors that are decently well built, so we're talking Intel, AMD is kind of a mixed bag, but you should have this stuff activated. I know AMD's catching up. I've been told a million times.
There are many processor producers and they all make very interesting and useful products.
Yeah, well,
yes, I agree. Most modern hardware should be able to accommodate many of these features without any noticeable performance drop.
Yeah,
regardless of the supplier.
And just for background, Krob, how I became the optimization czar at Gentoo is I showed up with the Red Hat documentation of Red Hat recommended flags, and they were like, "Yeah, this is wrong," and I was like, "No, how do you mean they're wrong?" You're like, "No, this is just, what are you doing? Why are you using Red Hat documentation?" I had to prove all of these flags to them. So yes, I am very familiar with flags on compilers and messing around with that.
Well, and that's where, depending on what the target audience is that the developer is making the software for, their intended purpose might not be commercial use, running an enterprise. They're just making an interesting utility or some cool app. And, there's that unexpected consumer. And I guess that project needs to decide how important that opinion is for them and their development goals.
Mm-hmm. But like, for example, one thing I've noticed is like most applications should like compile with assertions. Some don't. And most of the time they're legitimate problems that need to get reported upstream because like they are like scary problems. So like most applications at this, like, and that's the thing, like that's what I learned is that like, yeah, like we could sit here, you could say like, oh, debugging shouldn't work, but it really should. Like that's the thing. Like if it doesn't work, then you'll have issues compiling it with playing. Like, so I do think that like
it should definitely work, but that might not be something you turn on in your production environment because
correct.
That's not an awesome idea to get, open up that information source to a potential adversary. But there definitely should be an option.
Correct. You're right.
And you don't want to get, ship can the whole thing out of the gate because there are valid purposes for doing debug.
Correct.
In pre-production.
My thing is that like, how there's different levels of debugging is just like, you still need to have debugging. Like most distros will actually at least give you primary level of debugging so you know what crashed.
Yeah. And that's more of a implementation guide. When you go into production, turn these things off on live systems.
Right.
But before then, it's perfectly valid and critical to troubleshooting and getting things to work.
And one thing I want to say, Crob, and this might not be a SIRT thing, but this is kind of just a general thing. I've noticed that a lot of people like to play like, let's see what works with like things like compiler flags, and it's like might not be the best place to play this game. But yeah, it's not like anyone really understands, like takes time to read the guide. But yeah, just saying.
Well, it's it takes I would say a very smart, very experienced person to really kind of understand this, and then to be able to do like the performance assessment. It takes some smart people and it takes time, which is generally something a mainstream developer doesn't have that experience, is not as interested in that. But if enterprises care, that could be potentially the research that they give back to that community saying, hey, we looked at this and we talked about these options, and there might be ways to optimize that trade-off between performance and security.
Let me also say this, that Linux is changing right now a whole lot. Main reason, and my one of the things that I think is leading the change is the whole Steam Deck, because gamers are now like getting really into Linux. And what's interesting, and this is something that I don't know.
You mean this?
Yes, that thing. Yeah, it's pretty cool, I'm not gonna lie. But they distribute everything through Flatpak, correct?
I believe so, yeah.
And that's another thing, because there's another thing about like, should everything be distributed as a Flatpak for security reasons? Because Flatpaks are theoretically more secure. I know that if you're going to start poking at them, I mean, you can find problems with anything, but I think that they are inherently more secure than what we had before. So
this is good conversation. So to draw us back towards our goal.
Yes.
It sounds like a potential role the SIRT could take on would be kind of advertising and communicating good practices like compiler options, potentially kind of training or mentoring or educating project maintainers and developers on here's perspectives or ways to communicate. So it sounds like that. Those two things could be in alignment with our proposed mission.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a quote that said that from somebody that I talked to in the kernel project that wishes to remain anonymous. because people are weird.
It was Greg KH.
Yeah, exactly. But he told me that he thinks the P-Cert's best position would be to align like the security like practices amongst all like major groups at least.
Yeah. And we're not going to be able to tell anybody what to do, but we can show the benefits.
Right.
Hey,
Well,
look
we
what
can tell
happens when you have
people.
this consistent. It depends. We
It
could
doesn't
try.
go well.
I can't tell my kids what to do, let alone,
You're not trying hard enough then. So what I'm doing is I've started a patch for the understanding the problem space because I want to make sure that we get a lot of this actually defined. So under 1.1 where it says explanation, I've got in order for the SIRT to narrow and define the breadth of services it offers, we must first understand the current problems as expressed by the various types of open source projects. To that end, an initial high-level summary of these problems is as follows and will be leveraged to verify the services offered assist in addressing the problems where reasonable and appropriate. And then the first one I have is there exist open source projects and communities that are culturally adverse to applying security changes as the software they make available makes no guarantees, is hobbyist, or is not intended to become critical. The next one is security is often a single point of failure due to lack of like knowledge in that domain for a given project. Does that so far sound good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I'm typing out kind of the points that we have because those should assist in driving the surveys for project maintainers, open source security teams, and the various mailing lists. So the deliverables for each of those sections should be the output of the survey to either reconfirm or clarify those problems as we understand them. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
One thing I want to add, okay, that I did not talk about, I do, because I've been thinking about how I can say this, okay, because there's a specific project that was mentioned multiple times. We probably know, let's just say they won the worst vendor of the year award multiple times. You could probably guess who it is, but what, like, basic, Crop knows. They want to know what can be done about answers like, you're an idiot, go take a walk, basically, in like very like lightweight terms, because there's a lot of like people say that this is like there are critical elements in Linux, shall we say, that are governed by people that just can't be wrong. Like they are God's gift to the Linux community. So they want it. There's certain distros specifically.
No comment.
Yeah, right. But there's certain distros that would like to know if the P-Cert would be with like, could they report to the P-Cert and was there something that can be done about said project or projects?
And then that's potentially a task. I don't know that would be as high priority, but that's definitely something that if there was a problem, a concern identified, that's something the P-Cert could try to step in to assist in figuring out how to make that interaction more frictionless.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is something we could do. I don't know that would want to be our primary job to kind of, because you're never going to be able to fix people, and we could try to influence and be nice and to try to provide tools and job aids or whatever. But at the end of the day, if someone is not interested in acting professionally and being helpful, and they are in a position of power in that particular community, there's not a lot we can do. The community sees value in that person being a leader, and they value the technical acumen more than their interpersonal skills.
Well, here, let me draw out the concern. Like if we talk about TPM, so for example, to not specifically be saying we're talking about System D, but System D has the implementation of TPM. So in other words, their opinion of how TPM should operate has essentially becomes Linux's opinion on how TPM operates. So that should, like what certain people are saying is that should be more open forum, because like certain things right now, like kind of are done a certain way and it doesn't make it like it can affect security, because this is where opinions and security kind of get the line blurred.
That is a problem. I don't know that that is a problem that the PSIRT can correct. But if a community is not going the direction that consumers want it to go, you have choices. People could participate more and have a stronger voice and influence in that community. They could look for alternatives. I know exactly what you're talking about, and it's that is because we didn't write that software.
Yep.
We can have an opinion, but at the end of the day, how that community governs itself is up to that community. And if we want to change that, we need to become actively engaged in that community.
Right.
And I don't know that PSIRT is going to be able to correct those type, but we could definitely step in and say, hey, there's a disconnect between the broader audience and how you do things. Have you thought about leveraging these tools or sharing updates or whatever the actual
Right. Okay.
proposed solution might be?
There's just a certain opinion that like we're too dependent on certain components, and those certain components are not community really.
That's unfortunate. I wish it wasn't that way.
Yep.
I don't we're and it's a similar situation to the kernel, that it's at the heart of everything, but at least that community has changed over the years, where they are I don't say necessarily customer focused, but they're much more they've become very efficient in how they do things, and they do account for user stories, but the kernel sets their own direction, that they have their own rules and their own direction. It's kind of up to us to follow along, because there really isn't a viable alternative, so you
Right.
contribute to making it better.
Right. No, I agree. There was something that did come up because it
Yeah.
was,
There are some projects that are very generate a very visceral reaction amongst the community, especially based off of past behavior.
I don't think sometimes those opinions are not bad. It's just how they're delivered. That is the issue.
Yeah, exactly. And think about Kubernetes started off as a small group, and gradually grew, and then they went and understood that a big part of how they're going to be successful is that community engagement. So and a big part of community engagement is security. So that particular set of projects created a security team to help manage that. And I don't recall specifically for every not every project is large enough or interested to have that focused security team internally, which is the group that this PSIRT, this OSS CERT would interact with, as we are exchanging information or receiving.
Something for the plan. So is there going to be a difference between projects that do not have security teams and that do?
Yeah, and that's where that story you described, where a developer doesn't have the experience to do security testing. They've never had to do. It's not been a priority, and not had the experience. That's going to be a different style of interaction the CERT will have, and that would be more of awareness. Hey, here's some tools you can use, some ways you can do. We'll make some connections to help give you those experiences.
And speaking of that, I did actually have this conversation with some of the people that I met from NPM doing the NPM best practices guide. Mm-hmm. And they were like, yeah, that's the completely wrong idea, because build tools in JavaScript are the first to get targeted for malware because of the size and the number of dependencies they have externally. So they're very like vulnerable targets. So they were like, yeah, like you should go talk to your boy and be like, dude, you're just flat out wrong. And I'm like, I know, but I can't do that. Like, I can't just tell someone you're flat out wrong. It's not like I'm like that. But it's actually interesting, because I think that's the space where maybe like the PSIRT should step in and like bridging, because I know for a fact that they don't know that like they would be targeted. And I just don't necessarily think this is something that when, for example, Astro and Veet communicate with each other, they actually communicate about. So there's a disconnect somewhere in that chain of events about who's security responsible, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah, and I do want to avoid, I want to avoid us this effort to be seen as, we're from the OpenSSF and we're here to help, stepping in, trying to replace process.
Right.
These projects are perfectly entitled to run things, manage themselves. We're here just to be extra assistance, that kind of wise big brother, big sister, helping coach them. This is what we're sharing learnings, and here's how you can help do things better. And if communicating across a broad spectrum of consumers is important to you, we can definitely make connections and help you do that.
Right.
But I don't want to be seen as we're here to come in here and fix everything.
I would say in that scenario, for example, would our role be to basically be like, look, it's fine that you want to do what you want to do, but just so you know, like, it's not as easy as just saying like, oh, well, the other people don't do it, so I'm not going to do it either. Like, because that's just not the right stance to have. I mean,
I can have an opinion, but my opinion is external and secondary to how that project wants to manage itself.
Correct. But that's what I'm saying. So would we just?
Because I'm not contributing to that project. I'm not. I don't really get a vote. I can have an opinion, but I don't get a vote.
So that's what I'm saying. So would our job there just to be maybe share just facts that, and I'm making this fact up, that build tools in JS are X amount % more targeted in 2020 than other packages.
Yeah.
Like, what you do with that information is on you. We just educate you.
That's definitely something else that potentially there's some like a research aspect of the PSIRT, is that we do that analysis across ecosystems and say, we've observed these facts and these trends. That's something else, another potential task, a capability that PSIRT might want to develop, is having that and having that kind of scholarly report to help influence behavior.
Interesting. I like that.
And a tactic we could take is similar to how Alpha and Omega are approaching things. Is they thought they would be working with individual projects initially, but they've pivoted. Now they're working on the larger ecosystems and foundations, where they can basically have kind of an amplified effect when going in, talking at something at a foundation level. Ideally, is going to cascade down to everybody within that foundation more quickly. And that could be an approach we take, is, we would try to engage with certain ecosystems, platforms, whatever.
That's a good idea. I think that's more cohesive.
Yeah. And that would be maybe the proactive piece of it, is we would try to engage the NPM community. And that would be figuring out how we can get their practices documented and compared to how they help give them insights into how other ecosystems work to help improve that general capability for the whole NPM ecosystem, as opposed to project by project by project.
Agreed. I like that.
So I'm going through the time and resource estimate for those surveys that we talked about. Do you think it's prudent to allow for about 3 weeks to complete the survey itself, with 2 months for analysis, another 3 weeks for developing a report, and then another month for refining the service listing?
Yeah, that feels okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then it is probably going to take about a month to develop the survey itself, plus another 2 weeks of coordination with OpenSSF to get it developed.
What I was trying to do is kind of take the stuff that comes up the most from my random conversations with project maintainers, and try to use that as a foundation for the survey. So that way the survey is not so open-ended.
Yeah, and I don't think that there are elements of the survey or portions of it that will need to be open-ended, but based off of your initial analysis, some of the readings that we've already done with the various guides, and each of the group members' personal experiences, I think we can come up with either some multiple choice or multiple selections for completion of the survey with enough free form text on those areas where we really need to understand a little bit more of the specific nuance associated with that project or that particular problem space. So it shouldn't be excruciating to go through the results. And I've run enough surveys in my time that I don't like free form fields as much as the next person. So I think overall getting that put together would be beneficial as a deliverable of this. And then getting that comparison or refinement of the existing services.
And I think we could pull the initial timeline in on creation of that survey if we are interested in meeting more frequently or having one-off meeting targeted on that.
Yeah, I think it depends largely on community participation and how much we can actually get done and how many surveys we put out or how many respondents we get. If we get 1,000, it's going to be a lot longer, regardless of how often we meet. I don't think we'll hit that.
And if we have a kind of a target in mind for when we might want to do that, I can precede that with Jennifer Bly, who from the marketing team, and she would probably be our liaison to help get that survey out. So I can kind of see, we're thinking about this date. Would that be, do you have resources available to help us around that time?
Yeah. So then 1.2 is around discussing our proposal with a representative set of open source developers and security incident responders. So this is, in my mind, the reconfirmation of the services based off of that survey. Okay. Let me just make sure I got that.
Agreed. And thank you for doing this. I mean, very helpful.
Yep. I'm listening to you all talking. I'm just writing everything down. Useful to the communities. Okay, and for our key steps and milestones in this one, we've got likely needs coordination with outreach team and OpenSSF. That one makes sense. A slick sheet explaining the services. All of this obviously contingent on the other two streams. We need to think through the marketing and creative needs, document possible channels for outreach, and create a rules of engagement to ensure positive outcomes for community engagements. That all makes sense. So from a timeline perspective, that slick sheet's probably going to be about a month of OpenSSF time from the design team once they have content. So,
and that's if we can get creative, and that there's potential, not cost to us, but there's potentially cost involved that we would need to make sure Jennifer is ready to go with.
Yeah, I mean, and if Jennifer isn't capable of supporting that, I'm sure there are plenty of folks that can take a Google Doc with some pretty graphics and turn it into a PDF to email.
Yeah, but we want to make sure, like, checking that there's no, it's not encumbered by, our artwork isn't encumbered by a license or anything.
Yeah. Is there any reason to believe or think that we would need any sort of enhanced website to express the services?
When the PSIRT is up and running, yes.
Okay. Does that need to happen for procedures around outreach to development communities?
Not
or yet. Is the well, you said not yet. Now remember, this is year 1 and year 2 crop.
It'll be end of year 1, year 2.
Okay.
That we would want to have a website that explains who we are, what we do. And this would be after we've probably gone through 1 or 2 rounds of listening and getting feedback and proposing. So I expect that we'll have an idea. We'll have a core set of, here's the 3 things we're going to start off offering the first year, and we'll get feedback on that. We may be able to adjust some in the first year, but others will have to get pushed to future years.
So that development of a website is going to require at least what, two web developers?
Yes.
and then all the content that goes with it.
Right.
Okay.
And that would be, there's going to be volunteer hours from this group. And then there's also going to be like the whole marketing, getting the artists and the creatives doing it.
As far as the
Yep.
technical web work, I got that covered.
Well, this would be like on an OpenSSF property, so we just need to follow their, they have certain procedures and rules, so we'll make sure that we're able to do that. But yeah, the actual technical coding.
Yeah.
Great. I love volunteer.
Well, if not me, I know, that I've been rallying people for SKF, so.
All right, so I've got the Slick sheet covered. I've got the website. Does this also include the development of webinar content and blog posts?
Yes, and that's going to be something we need to put on the education SIGs backlog. And listening to that group, this particular problem set is not something that they're addressing yet. So we'll make sure we get in the queue for that, because they're focused on some different things.
Yeah.
So if we come like with a here's the packet, we have all this almost all done, and pass over to them for evangelizing, that will probably be more successful or go more quickly. But if we're asking them to write content with us, that's going to be longer, because this whole problem is not part of what they're looking at right now.
Right. And I think that would be an expected procedure for the EDU SIG, is that anybody relying on their services, they'd come to them with preformed content and they would just say, this is too detailed. You need to make it a little bit more easier to understand.
Yeah.
Or provide pointers. Okay, so I think we've got time and resource estimate associated with that. Webinars and blogs is obviously contingent upon the availability of the EDU SIG to review final content, and needs content development, which we don't know what that looks like yet because nothing is defined. And then we also need the recording space,
which
and publishing process.
The EDU SIG is going to be spinning up their own podcast. So that's something that we could leverage.
Ooh.
And we'll have all the connections to publishing both video and audio, and also the webinar. So that they are working on that. So we're going to have a
fancy
security development podcast that we can leverage for other stuff.
All right. And then the next one that we have for 1.3 is assist maintainers through the SIRT's offering. So based on the SIRT's defined engagement model, which is not part of this stream, it's a different one, existing security groups and criteria to the extent practically possible for incident responders. Oh, this is about assisting them. Yep. The SIRT is prepared to assist and support at least one request for engagement and deliver a retrospective report at the end of the year, at the end of year one, to be used to iterate and improve for future engagements. So key steps and milestones, the security buddy presentation. This is around something. Can either of you remind me if it's the security buddy presentation from CNCF STAG about how they run their security buddy program, or is this more of a development of a SIRT security buddy program and provide a presentation?
I think it's the latter.
Okay.
Definitely, if there's pre-existing art, I'm not afraid to
it's not the
borrow.
Same. It's just the same name.
It might be an interesting framework or some ideas that we can tailor. But yes, we need to create our own.
Well, then I would be more than happy to talk about security buddies at one of the larger meetup calls, so everyone knows what it is.
Okay. And I think this is going to be dependent on Stream 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's heavily dependent on Stream 2's deliverable.
Okay. So the concept of the buddy, though, because we don't know whether or not they're volunteers yet, or if they are staff or something in between, or even contractors, it's really about person hours that we need to account for.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on, we don't know what their request intake actually looks like or how many people are planning on beating down the doors of the SIRT for information about this. We can't actually abstract what their resource hour estimate for that's going to look like. Does that make sense?
It does. I feel we can estimate a base block of hours. This is what we need to do to make the materials. And but beyond that, we're going to have to say ... This will be determined at a future date, because we're not going to be able to say it's 8 hours per engagement, or we need
Should we say
27 people.
The training for the security buddy. I'm sure that security
Oh,
training.
yep, that's a good call.
Yeah.
Well, there's the training development, and then there's the additional coursework that's associated with anything for engaging with community maintainers. So like in the TOC, we're required to take specific Linux Foundation trainings because of the positions that we hold within the community. So I would imagine a security buddy taking on that role, in addition to the buddy training, needs to have an allocation for the Linux Foundation courses that they would be required to take.
Love it.
And those courses are probably what, there's at least 2 that I'm thinking of. Like there's the secure development one, and there's the inclusive and diversity one, and that there's probably at least 3 or 4 of them.
Yeah, we want to make sure that our representatives are trained in saying and doing the right thing. So I completely agree with that.
Do you
and
think
so there's consistency too?
4 hours for a training estimate on Linux specific training?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll need to define what those are.
And then there'll be training specific to the process of the CERT.
Correct.
This is how we do things.
So there's security buddy training, which is more around how to be a security buddy. And then there's the CERT specific training. And then there's Linux Foundation training.
Mm-hmm.
Defined list of courses. And then CERT process. I'm going to estimate another 4 hours of CERT process training, depending on how many guides, documents, services that we end up developing. I mean, it will probably be more than that. So maybe 4 to 6. And it might just be documentation review.
Yeah.
The security buddy training development is probably going to be about 2 to 3 weeks of work, because the bulk of the content is going to come through the actual CERT process itself, and the rest of it is like, here's how you engage with communities, and here is a playbook for, depending on how communities respond to you,
Mm-hmm.
but you should, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And all right, so I think I've got that one. And I'll move those down, identifying individuals to act as buddies to present this and partner with maintainers, and then developing the list of projects to start with. Okay. So what I'll do, Randall, if you're okay with this, I'll go ahead and do a PR on this, and you all can review and comment, but then hopefully section 1 should be done and ready for folks to review.
Awesome.
That sound good? Are we the first ones done?
Awesome.
As
From
soon
this
as I hit like
yes.
yes, excellent. We did it in one meeting.
Francis is pretty close, but he basically fobbed everything up for section 3. He fobbed everything over to section 2. Like, I'm waiting on this. I'm waiting on that. So we have estimates.
Okay.
Timeline. So this is awesome. I really appreciate the help today, folks.
Yep. I wanted to give you all heads up. KubeCon is next week. I'm not available because I'll be on the stage. And then the week after, I am out. I'm probably not going to be responsive for several days. So don't count on me for the next 2 weeks.
Okay. I'm also out next week. So
are you coming to KubeCon?
I'm not.
No.
Like, Officially, we have very little travel allowed. So I am
Hmm.
taking personal time to go to a security conference in Cleveland I've presented at for the last 15 years. So
Oh,
I'm doing a talk and then I'm doing a keynote there. So
well, congratulations.
thank you.
Randall, are you going to keep going?
I am not.
I wish I was.
Are either of you going to Cloud Native Security Con in February?
I need to start going because I'm getting like dragged back into Kubernetes with SKF by the nose.
I need the economy to get out of the toilet, so my company refunds travel.
Okay. All right. Well, whenever you show up to a conference I'm at, it will be nice to meet you.
Absolutely.
Once I actually get like I need to get like an actual legitimate like extender for my USB, and then I could actually use my webcam, and then you guys can see what I look like. 'Cause I know I'm like the person X. For as much as I'm here and I talk.
Yeah, I do a fancy podcast for work, so I already have all the plug-in nonsense. So you have to look at my face in 4K.
You see, yeah, there's a story behind this motherboard. Let's just put it that way. Once upon a time, I tried designing motherboards.
It's not easy.
No, but you know me, I never pick the easy things.
Well, thank you all. I'm going to go refresh my water before section 2.
Yep. See you there.
I will be there at section 2, but I will not. I probably won't be participating as much because I do have to run the I'm not going to run, but I'm going to be at the SKF meeting right now. So.
Yeah, no worries.
All right, and Krob, I made for education. I made the email for Jennifer, and I'm going to send that to her.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. I'll talk to you guys later. Thank you, everyone.
See ya. Bye.